I think this is the ultimate preventative and wellness tool. And I say that because
Yeah.
ideally we're going to give you the tools and the resources to be an advocate for your own patient care, your own healthcare, right? But then also additional guidance on some of these lifestyle markers so you can optimize your health goals and intentions.
Mhm.
And whether that's longevity, whether that's being better, sleep, understanding your emotional health, dialing your hormones, each of these are a piece to help you feel better. I think you can utilize this to empower yourself through education and additional resources to optimize your health goals.
Welcome to the GenX Shift podcast, a show for Gen Xers who are navigating some pretty tough transitions and aren't sure how to move forward. I'm your host, Michelle Walter, proud Gen Xer, former lawyer turned entrepreneur, huge Jason Momoa fan, and margarita snob. And I've navigated a lot of transitions in my life, from losing my mom suddenly to a heart attack to starting my own business. But I often did it all on my own because I was too stubborn to ask for help. Now I'm on a mission to give actionable strategies to other Gen Xers so that they can find the confidence, courage, and clarity they need to make a shift. So let's rock and roll. Hey, my awesome Gen Xers, welcome back to the podcast. The episode today is for all the Gen Xers out there like myself who sometimes feel, or maybe oftentimes feel, like our mental and physical health has gotten out of control and we have no autonomy or power over what is happening for us. For me, it can sometimes feel like it's just this gigantic boulder that's rolling downhill and catching steam and getting bigger by the minute, and I can't seem to get my arms around it. My guest today is Matt Komneck, who is with Grounded Healthcare, and our conversation today is centering around two things: genetic testing and microdosing. We're going to explain what both of those are in more detail, so I'm not going to go into it right now. But this episode is intended to give you information and knowledge so that you can start to take back some autonomy over your healthcare, both mental and physical. I'm going to give a disclaimer first because I'm a former lawyer and because I want folks to know that this podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered as medical advice. Do not use this podcast as a basis for self-diagnosis or treatment of any medical condition. Please consult with your healthcare provider before making any decisions related to your health. And the views expressed today on this podcast are solely for those of the host, me, and my guest, Matt, and don't necessarily reflect the opinion of any organization. So, legal mumbo jumbo aside, what you're going to learn today is a lot of scientific and technical information that I think will actually be very digestible for you because Matt has a beautiful way of explaining this. He has spent his career in healthcare and healthcare administration, and he knows how to explain this information in a way that you can digest and understand. So we're going to talk about what genetic testing is and sort of three pillars of the type of genetic testing that his company Grounded Healthcare does. Now, this is not the genetic testing where you can see, am I predisposed to breast cancer? That's not what we're talking about. There are three pillars of his genetic testing. One is to understand prescription medications that you take and how can your body actually metabolize or not metabolize those medications. And the reason that's important is because there's a lot of trial and error that goes into whether a medication is helpful for you or not. Have you ever had that happen? Have you ever had a doctor or a therapist or psychiatrist prescribe you a med and say, well, we're going to have to try this for a while and see how it goes? What if you could actually know ahead of time whether your body is going to be able to metabolize that medication? It would save you time, frustration, and money. So that's the first pillar. We're going to talk about genetic testing and how it can give you insight into how your body metabolizes the prescription medicine that you're taking. The second pillar is natural remedies, like, for example, psilocybin or ketamine or MDMA, which gets into the second piece of the conversation around microdosing too. But the genetic testing will also be able to tell you, how are you genetically set up to metabolize natural remedies. And the third pillar are other lifestyle genetics. Like, have you ever been curious as to why you might be predisposed to sleep a long time or not sleep a long time? or maybe how you might be predisposed to metabolizing caffeine and how that impacts your sleep. Or here's one for all the Gen X gals out there, how you might be set up from a hormonal standpoint that might be impacting how you're moving through menopause. Like, what if you had a test that could actually show your genetic indicators for things like hormones like estrogen and progesterone? Okay. Now, I want to be clear that this genetic testing does not diagnose anything, and it also doesn't sentence you to a particular condition or disease or lifestyle. We talk about epigenetics, and again, we explain what that is. But with this testing, you can understand what your genetic predisposition is so that you can start making decisions about whether those genes get turned on or turned off, right? Now, we can't control everything, but we can start to take more autonomy over our environment, our diet, our lifestyle, our technology, the things we consume, so that we can have more of an impact over whether those genes get turned on or off, okay? That's the power of this genetic testing. The second piece of the conversation talks about microdosing, and Matt shares his personal journey of microdosing and how it has helped him with anxiety and depression, navigating the recent loss of his father due to brain cancer. Again, this is Matt's experience, so this is not meant to recommend or prescribe or diagnose anything. I think it's a really helpful conversation to start having over the potential of natural remedies and microdosing, and how people going through the types of health, both physical and mental health changes that Gen Xers are going through right now, how we can find something that could provide a bridge for us to find more capacity to deal with these transitions and changes that we're going through. So I hope you enjoy this conversation. I think it has the potential to be very empowering and informative, and I'll catch you on the other side. Hey, Matt, welcome to the Gen X Shift podcast. I'm so grateful to have you here today, and I think this is going to be a really groundbreaking, thought-provoking conversation for a lot of Gen Xers, so I appreciate you taking the time to be here.
No, awesome, Michelle. Great to be here as well, and thank you for having me.
Yeah, I always like to tell listeners how we know each other. And we haven't known each other all that long. It's been this year, like 6 months, maybe. We met through a mutual connection. Shout out to Maddie Calger, who's a realtor here in the Denver area. Just awesome, badass, spitfire. She's just such a great connector. And so she had done a yoga event and had invited me to come and do a guided meditation. And you were at the event. And so we kind of hit it off, and then we met for coffee, and I got to learn more about you and your business. And I think you were the one that I'm so glad suggested, hey, I think there's a lot of great intersections and ways that we could collaborate. And so I'm glad that this can be our first collaboration and your first podcast ever, which is awesome. So I feel very honored
yes, fortunate to have drove on that snowy day to the Yoga and Connections and get to be guided through your mindfulness.
Yeah, that was a really brutally cold, icky Denver day. So it was the space we were in. What's that place called down in Denver? It just left. Yes, it's beautiful. It was such an amazing event. So yeah, I'm really glad to get to be in your orbit and to learn from you about some topics that I knew virtually nothing about, and that I think are going to be very educational. Again, this is for educational purposes. I've given that disclaimer in the intro, but I can't repeat it enough. Educational purposes for other Gen Xers. And so I had wanted to have you on the podcast because as a Gen Xer, of course, we're all aging, right? And Gen Xers are noticing, particularly at this point in our life, and especially women who are going through perimenopause and menopause, we're noticing all kinds of hormonal changes, physical changes. I've had friends who've been diagnosed with autoimmune disease, long COVID, cancer. There's a lot of health transitions that Gen Xers are struggling through right now, on top of just like normal aging and degeneration. And in my personal experience, I think a lot of times because of how our Western medical society is and structured, we get a lot of knee-jerk reactions from our doctors in the 5 minutes that they're willing to sit down and talk to us that are like, we'll just take this pill and we'll try this and see how it works. And there isn't much of an effort for many reasons to not only spend more time with people, but to really have a more holistic perspective of, are these medications the right medications for people? How is your body handling these medications? And so the topics that we're going to get in today, again, for educational purposes, go talk to your doctor, are ones that hopefully will start to pique your curiosity about how Gen Xers can handle and navigate some of these health transitions that they're going through. So that's why I wanted to have you on. And the big reveal, I always say this for Gen Xers, you are not a Gen Xer. You're a thorough millennial, right? You're 38. I'm going to give away.
Yes, 38.
Yeah. Which is, I've had other millennials and boomers on the podcast. It's all just a label at the end of the day. And I think you have such a tremendous wealth of knowledge and background, and we're going to get into that here in a minute, that's going to be so valuable for Gen Xers. And you're one of those people who just feels like a wise old soul, like you've lived a lot longer than you actually have. So, all right, so let's get in.
Well.
Yeah. And we'll talk about that a little bit too. You are somebody you've committed your entire career to advancing the healthcare space. And your full bio is going to be in the show notes, but I wanted to hit a couple of the highlights here to give folks some context that you know what you're talking about. You've got a lot of experience in this area. And so you had a Bachelor's of Science and a Master's in Public Health, emphasizing health policy and management. And you've had a really varied background over the course of your career in health administration to medical devices, and you've collaborated with a lot of different healthcare providers. And that all eventually led you to working with Grounded Healthcare, which we're going to talk about here in Colorado. And so I want to kick it over to you to tell us, just first of all, to kind of rewind the tape a little bit and tell us a little bit about your background growing up as a millennial and what that was like for you, and how you eventually started down this healthcare path to get to the work that you're doing now in genetic testing and microdosing.
No, thank you. Yeah. So I grew up in south of Houston in Texas, small town. I would say pretty uneventful childhood, just very sports oriented, outdoor oriented. We were 15 minutes from the beach. So a lot of my earliest memories of visiting the beach with my parents, digging holes, building sand castles, and then, kind of, Jack and Diane kind of story, like being coached by my dad, being driven around by my mom and parents, eating a lot of peanut butter jelly sandwiches and bomb pops, and chasing the ice cream man around. um, but both my parents were educators. So my mom was a secretary in a local elementary school. My dad was a coach, then a principal, eventually assistant superintendent. So was always surrounded by education. And, that's the only thing that I really knew was, impacting people through education and coaching and providing, guidance. And so, when I was looking for a career, I always, kind of went towards more of the sports medicine world, having been a very okay athlete in high school. That was always something that was very near and dear to my heart. So went to college, Bachelor's of Science, like I said, thought I wanted to be a physician, realized I didn't necessarily want to give up my 20s to become a provider. And so transitioned in more to a health administration role. And so, knowing that healthcare was continuing to grow was near and dear to my heart. Being able to help people and serve people, the health administration aspect kind of came to fruition towards the end of college. And so, I would say that's the beginning of my life into college, and then started my career doing physician management. So this was around the Affordable Care Act, when hospital systems were buying out physician groups because no one knew what the reimbursements were going to look like and how the current landscape was going to change with the Affordable Care Act coming. So, I worked for a large hospital. We managed rural hospitals. We managed multiple clinics, multidisciplinary clinics. and tried to provide increased coordination of care for, in Central Texas. And so that's how I kind of started my career. And through that, I was working with physicians to optimize access to care, and then increase coordination of care, which are two things that have continued through my career. From there, I switched over to more medical device, where I was working in the operating room with physicians, guiding them on certain devices and optimizing, their knowledge to optimize patient goals. And then after that, I transitioned to clinical laboratory, which really was the catalyst to get me where I am today. And through working with providers, psychiatrists, therapists, psychologists, we were personalizing care plans. And I saw a palpable change in people that were struggling, using their genetics to really personalize and provide individualized care. And then that's transitioned more to grounded now.
When I hear your background and your story, of course, looking back, it seems obvious that you are where you are now. And I just think it's really cool to look back over our stories and see how all the things have lined up to put you where you are now, because you are so clearly somebody who is about the pragmatism of science in the medical profession and trying to be that facilitator. I see you and hear you as a facilitator between the medical side and the patient side. And so it's a beautiful journey and just makes sense where you are now. So tell us, we're going to get into the genetic testing and the microdosing, but tell us just a little bit about Grounded Healthcare and what their mission is.
No, thank you. Yeah. So, through my long-winded speech of how I became who I am today and where I am today, I say I'm the educator and advocate for Grounded Healthcare, but essentially our goal in the organization is a virtual wellness clinic that specializes in personalized care, and we do that through advanced genetic analysis and clinical microdosing guidance. And so, the reason I like to say personalized care is because, we've had this technology for over a decade now, which is called pharmacogenomics, which basically tells people how they metabolize medications. And so, the future of medicine is now, but people don't necessarily understand that or know that because our current health system is broken in some ways, right? So we have a one size fits all healthcare system. You show up to your provider, they offer you a medication to treat a symptom, not necessarily you as a whole. They give you 15 minutes because that's the way the system works, because they have to work harder and harder to make the same amount of money. And that's just kind of, my background, health administration, and my skews on that. However, our goal with Grounded is to provide, a safe and approachable way for people to understand their medications, to feel heard and listened to. And also, if they're looking for natural alternatives such as THC, psilocybin, maybe even ketamine, that they have some guidance to be able to do this with an informed decision, to feel safe and confident in their choices.
You said a really big word in there that I think was pharmacogenetics. Did I hear that correctly?
Yes.
Yeah. And you said what it was, but can you just repeat what pharmacogenetics is?
Yeah, so the basis of pharmacogenetics is, it's a genetic test with a cheek swab where it would tell you how your body metabolizes medications. And so this is important for multiple reasons, right? And so there's studies that show increased cost saving associated with genetic testing, decrease adverse drug reactions, increase optimism of therapies such as medications, right? And so the way the government works now is they put you on what's called a formulary. So there's basically the physician has to follow a guidance given by the insurance companies to follow certain medications, right? So you have to potentially fail multiple medications over time before you find the one that you find that works, right? So I call it the therapeutic guessing game, or trial and error, which costs time, money, energy. And that's the last thing you want to do is when you're struggling or not feeling well, is to have to go through multiple medications and fail them before the insurance is going to cover it for you. And so, the goal with PGX, which is its nickname, is to be able to decrease that therapeutic guessing game, get you on the medication that's best for you earlier, and kind of decrease this time, energy, money involved with that. And so, some physicians know about this, some prescribers know about it, but as many of us know, is they don't necessarily always have the most time to talk to you. They have additional patient loads that they have, dictations, all these things, and it's a large burden of care to take on someone's prescriptions as a whole, right? And so, I talked about coordination of care previously, and so, your primary care physician may not talk to your cardiologist, who may not talk to your orthopedist, who may not talk to your psychiatrist, right? And so you could be on multiple medications that interact, and individuals may not even know that. And so, it's called adverse drug reactions, which are preventable through coordination of care, and millions of people. This happens to millions of people a year, that can be prevented. And so, that's the basis of kind of the test, is this PGX. So decreased adverse drug reactions, cost savings, decreased therapeutic guessing game is kind of the basis of where this is, become popular. But, I say the future of medicine is now is that we have this testing, but it's not utilized to the capacity that I think it should be. I think this should be the standard of care for anybody who's being put on medications, because I think the statistic is about 1 in 6 individuals right now is prescribed an antidepressant, and that's in the United States. And so if we're talking about GenX, it's closer to 1 in 5, and that's even higher in females. So, let's just say 1 in 5 people that are GenX are on an antidepressant. There's statistics that show that almost 40% of antidepressants don't work for individuals. So you're saying 2 in 5 people are going to have adverse drug reactions to their first prescription.
I am going to state this so eloquently. Everything you just said is like a duh. Like, it's a big duh. Like, why aren't we doing more of this? And that could be like a whole podcast series in and of itself. But I'm curious, how do your clients, and then we'll kind of get into the nuts and bolts of the genetic testing, what's the feedback that you're getting from your clients about when they take the genetic testing, the panels that you've done, to their doctors, their whole entourage of doctors? How is that being received by the medical profession?
It's really hit and miss, honestly. And so, one thing that we've changed, so I can talk about quickly why this hasn't been adopted. And number one, it's the current healthcare system, right?
Yes.
So let's just say I'm your primary care doctor, I'm your prescriber, right? If I provide this test, then I have the burden of care to look into every single medication that this person says. So let's just say they're on a polypharmacy regimen, and most people are on an antidepressant or usually on something else, whether it's a statin or a sleep med or something else, right? So let's just say, but this primary care is only prescribing one medication. If they do this test, then they have to take the burden of care and the coordination of care to look into all these other medications. So when you're seeing your primary care for 15, 20 minutes, do you think they're going to have time to extrapolate this kind of dense amount of data in a short amount of time to be able to provide actionable results? I would say no. So that's the first piece. Number two, of course, there's the cost barrier, right? So, it's either cash basis or insurance coverage, but insurance coverage takes a lot of time and energy because they don't necessarily want to cover this. So there's medical necessity involved in this, right? And so, there's the time constraints, there's the money constraints. And then the last piece is these are complex. So who's going to interpret these results? So as a primary care doctor, you are a jack of a lot of trades, right? And so, what medications that you're prescribed. Is it out of your scope to potentially talk about some neurology medications? Potentially, right? And so you don't necessarily want to take that on. And so, what we've done at Grounded is we have a pharmacist on our background or on our back end who goes through the pharmacological results to provide actionable data and then increase the coordination of care by calling your potential prescriber and saying, hey, this is what you're seeing. This is what your client's exhibiting based on their genetics. I would check here, here, and here. And so coming at it from a way of saying there's a time and cost savings with this, saying, hey, this is what we're seeing with your patient or client. This is what we would recommend. Just ending like that. A lot of people really appreciate that approach because it increases the coordination of care, and it's coming from an approachable person just as a pharmacist who is not necessarily competing with your prescriber, but aiding and being a resource and a tool to optimize this individual's goals.
Yeah, and it's one professional talking to another, because when when I hear that, and it all makes sense, right? We are dealing with a system that is broken in so many ways. I don't even know how we begin to try to fix it. And so it, at least for me, can feel very bleak and disempowering. And I actually think that there is a great opportunity for empowerment, because what individuals can do that they often don't feel like they have the ability to do when it comes to going to see their doctor is to stand up for themselves, to speak up for themselves, or to even know what to ask. How are they going to stand up for themselves, right? And so the type of testing and the coordination that y'all do is a piece of feedback, and it's a piece of very powerful knowledge and education that I, as the patient, as the individual, can use to educate myself, to empower myself to ask questions with my doctor and my other all of my doctors and all of my various healthcare providers, from, as you said, psychiatrists to the primary care. So it can, yes, our medical system can feel kind of disempowering. And I think this is a great way that gives people a bit of their power back. So I think that's brilliant. So, okay, so I want to first say for folks who don't know, one of the reasons that we will talk about the microdosing, I'll get to that, but is that Colorado, for those who don't know, and you have an amazing map that I'll link in the show notes too. Colorado is one of the states that in 2022, through Proposition, I think it was 122, I might have that number wrong,
Correct.
legalized microdosing, mushrooms, other kind of alternative, for lack of a better word, treatments. It's a staged process. There are going to be, are they calling them healthcare clinics that are going to deal in things like psilocybin, that will be opening in 2025. There's I'm going to link a couple of Colorado Public Radio articles in the show notes so people can catch up on the whole legal landscape of it if they want to. But I'm like, props to Colorado for opening the store. And there might be pros and cons with that for sure. But that's one of the reasons that we're kind of talking about these alternative treatments like psilocybin, is because it's now in Colorado legal. Other states, it's not. So I just want to put that note out there. I think, is there one other state too?
Yeah, so it is
Oregon.
Prop 122. They're talking
Mhm.
about in 2025 having a healing center model, which is essentially a
Healing
place
center.
where people can go to do larger journeys, facilitated by, a licensed professional to, watch them, over them, have, proper intake, setting, and then integration on the back end. So
Mhm.
to use this as additional healing modalities for people who are struggling. So
Yeah.
Oregon was the first state to legalize this, and they have their derivative of a healing center. And so what makes Colorado unique is that we have the healing center model that'll be formalized, that just got formalized in September, but will go into actual use in 2025. But they also have personal consumption usage. So for individuals just like you who want to share, or gift microdoses, we're able to, like, hey, Michelle, you want to come over and go for an elevated hike? We'll take a microdose, and then we're able to do that. And so Colorado has really been on the forefront, for that. And I'm fortunate to live in a state that is kind of progressive like that. But,
Yeah.
you're alluding to the map. There's, I think, around 30 states that will have still on the legislative ballot coming up, for some form of legislative reform. And then there's over 20 cities, I believe, in the United States right now that have taken it into their own hands to change their legislation and either decriminalize it or legalize it for their citizens.
Yeah. That is real progress. Okay, so let's back up and talk about the genetic testing piece of grounded healthcare first. So you said some of this before, how you're utilizing the genetic testing for safe consumption of medications. And so let's kind of get into the weeds a little bit. And you have provided some amazing references and some graphs and statistics that we're going to talk about. And if Grandma can figure out the technology, I'll put screenshots of the graphs in the video here for folks who are watching this on video. So
And as a millennial, I'll be able to help you with that.
Please, the millennial technologist to help me. I struggle. Dear God, it's a struggle. So you alluded to some of the benefits already in terms of the coordination of care, decreased adverse drug reaction, cost savings. So when we are talking about doing genetic testing, walk me through what that looks like and what information you learn as a result of doing the genetic testing.
No, great question, and thank you. So as I spoke, I was like, PGX or pharmacogenomic testing has been around for over a decade.
Mm-hmm.
But as technology continues to improve, we get more and more tools and resources to be able to utilize, right? And so that's one thing I'm very proud of where we are with our genetic testing at Grounded, um, and what it can do, which is much more than just medications, right? So I like to break it in three tiers. So we have the medications. So we talked about providing safe consumption practices for, pharmaceuticals, right? So how you metabolize, potential drug-to-drug interactions, decreasing trial and error and side effects, right? And so there's a lot of statistics about the cost savings, and efficacy and the decrease of trial and error. So that's really cool. So medications is number one that we look at.
Can
Number
I pause
two
on
is,
that? I might
of course,
interject in here a couple of times just to ask follow-up questions. So, and to give an example of that, I take Synthroid every day, have for decades because I had thyroid cancer decades ago and have no ability to produce Synthroid on my own. So, when you're talking about genetic testing for medications like that, I'd be able to look at that result and see how well my body is actually able to metabolize the Synthroid that I'm taking. Am I understanding that correctly?
yes, exactly.
Okay.
So I
Okay.
have to look at our panel, make sure Synthroid is on there. But that's the other piece of this too, is a lot of these genetic tests are just looking at antidepressants or psychotropics. And so that's just, in my opinion, that's one small blip in the radar of an entire person's life, right? And so if they're on one medication, there's potential they're on more. And so, we like to look at what's called a comprehensive panel. So we look at over 250 medications over multiple drug classes. So anytime that you potentially need to get on a medication, that we can have you put this into our system and check to see how your body's going to metabolize it. So I think that's something really special to look at because it's not necessarily the norm, but we want to look at an individual as a whole and treat them that way, right? Because, if we're just looking at one piece of a symptom, we're not looking at the whole body, and that's not comprehensive care. That's not personalized care, and that's not where we want to be. We want to
Yeah.
look at you as a unique individual and treat you that way.
So I'm going to break that down even a little bit more because when you talk about being able to see how your body metabolizes medication, we are talking about that because you're able to see through the genetic testing how your genetic makeup, which we'll come back to this in a little bit too, doesn't mean that it's a certainty, but kind of what you're predisposed to genetically in terms of how you might metabolize these medications. Is that correct?
Correct. Yes.
Okay.
So
All
it's
right.
it's another resource that you didn't previously have to be able to inform yourself and empower yourself to make informed decisions. And that's from a provider standpoint. That's from a advocate for your own health standpoint.
Right. Okay. So I interrupted you. So come back to you were talking about there's
Yeah.
three
So
kind
there's
of
three.
groups. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. So three pillars to grounded genetics. So one's the medications that we've gone through. The second is, as these natural alternative therapies have come to light, part of my career, kind of trajectory has been through our previous genetic laboratory. And through that, we are seeing people who are asking about, hey, I'm struggling. I really want to try ketamine or THC or psilocybin or MDMA because we've been reading these studies. And so at the time, this was years ago, I wasn't listen. I was hearing them, but I wasn't listening, right? And I was like, oh, these people are just seeking drugs, which is absolutely not the truth. They were just struggling to an extent that they were looking for something different. That the current health system was not helping them in the way they needed to be helped, and so they were asking for these. And so what we've done at Grounded, we've built a panel so people who are interested in natural alternatives such as THC, CBD, ketamine, psilocybin, which is magic mushrooms, MDMA, LSD. Um, as we do not condone illicit substances, people are seeking out these on a microdosing or macrodosing manner, and we want to provide the safety and the harm reduction services so people can utilize these if they so choose, right? And so first is medications, second is looking at natural medicines. And so let's just say THC, for example. THC has about 400 drug-to-drug interactions that are intermediate or high. And, we say that's kind of the state flower of Colorado, right? And so, I guarantee you a lot of people that are on specific cardiology meds and use THC or CBD to sleep don't realize that they're having an interaction that could be, adversely working with their medication. And so, that's one piece of data that a lot of people don't know. Same thing with psilocybin or some of these other alternatives, ketamine. There's contraindications for certain medications because of these drug-to-drug interactions. And so through our genetics, we're able to flag those, identify it, and provide safe consumption practices so people can optimize these alternative medicines if they so choose. So that's the second piece of our genetic testing. And the last piece, which I think is really cool, and this is really the future, is we look at lifestyle genetics and predispositions and biomarkers, right? And so we have the options for additional panels that look at sleep. And so within our sleep panel, we look at ideal sleep patterns, micro awakenings, stress-induced sleep or mood-induced sleep. Like, is it, do you need to be more cognizant of your sleep hygiene, your medications, your caffeine consumption? We look at hormones, and so potentially how your body processes or metabolizes hormones, which, Gen X, probably peri or post-menopause. This may be helpful in identifying what and how to utilize, external HRT. And then, we have other longevity panels. We have emotional and cognition health. So trying to provide additional resources and tools for people to optimize their health goals by using genetics and really providing, unique guidance. And the last piece I would say that I forgot was nutrition. Like, hey, how do we dial in our nutrition based on all of these? Because if we're on medications, we're probably depleting some of our hormones. We could be depleting some of our nutrient bases. And so how do we kind of navigate this with the world we live in? So just trying to provide these additional tools and resources for preventative care, but also, wellness and personalized care, so we can optimize your goals and intentions with you and work together.
And not to oversimplify this, but I want to drive this point home because we're geeking out on some science, which I love. And so I want to make sure folks, catch up. You can tell all of this from genetic markers. That's what I'm hearing in all of this. Like, your genes tell a story about how you are made up and what is influencing things like how you might be sleeping. And so you can tell from people's genetic makeup, and maybe this would be a good point to talk about epigenetics before we get into the graphs and statistics, but you can tell from somebody's genetic makeup, for example, if caffeine is going to be interfering at a certain level or to a certain point with their sleep or with their hormones or whatever it might be. I'm again oversimplifying, but is that generally correct?
That's our goal, is to simplify something that's complex, right? And that's the only way it's going to be actionable. So, providing, medication guidance, natural medicine guidance, lifestyle guidance, and having someone extrapolate that with you, whether that's a pharmacist or our genetic expert, I was like, now we can make lasting change. And so, you're not oversimplifying. It needs to be oversimplified for us to be able to understand it and to make it actionable, right? And so, like, for me instance, I'll talk about what my genetics have taught me, that I should not drink caffeine after the afternoon because I'm a slow metabolizer and it will keep me up at night. And so I had to learn that the hard way. But if I would have had this earlier in my life, it'd be like, hey, don't drink caffeine after noon. I also have a predisposition to addiction and heart disease and cognitive decline. And so, these are just genetic markers, right? So this is, let's just say in a vacuum, this is what my genetics tell me I'm predisposed to. Does it define who I am? It doesn't have to. And so let's provide recommendations and action items to optimize my goals and decrease potentially what predispositions I have. So for instance, I'm from Texas. Like I said, I was like, love my red meat, but, probably not great for my potential heart disease. So I can proudly say that through diet changes, exercise, that I've been able to decrease my, blood pressure, so I don't have to be on medications like everybody else in my family. So that was something that I made a cognitive decision to do to make sure that I'm ensuring that I'm using my genetics and to figure out how best to biohack my body so I can be around for a long time for my children, right? So, I use this as an example because this is the way that, like, hey, now that I know it's a predisposition, it empowers me to make the decision to make a lifestyle change. And so,
Yep.
we want this to be a tool to empower you to make change.
Yeah. Does this test, the type of genetic testing that you do, does it identify, for example, breast cancer genes?
No, so I mean,
Okay.
it's nice
Just wanted to
that
clarify
a
that.
lot of
Yeah.
the cancer, it's called BRCA,
Hmm.
tests have made genetic testing kind of on the forefront of things, but we don't look at any cancer genes. And so we're
Okay.
specific to medication metabolism, and then, essentially, like I said, natural medicine metabolism and lifestyle genes.
Okay. Just wanted to clarify that for folks. And so
Yes.
let's talk about epigenetics first, and then move into some of these statistics because we've kind of alluded to epigenetics. And for folks who don't know what epigenetics can you tell us what epigenetics is?
Yeah, so epigenetics is basically genetic change, and that's based on your environment and external factors. So stress, we talk about PTSD, basically it makes chemical changes in your brain that changes your genetic makeup. And so those are all external factors. So let's just say a soldier, for instance, who comes back from some trauma and some of the things he's seen, they will have epigenetic change that potentially for the worst. However, on the flip side is Michelle over here is an incredible mindfulness coach, and so there's studies that saying that mindfulness and meditation can have epigenetic changes in a positive way. And so there's the negative impacts that environmental factors, let's just say toxins, let's talk about stress, things like that can have on you, but also there's the positive ones, the palpable changes that we can make in our lives, and that's through diet, mindfulness, exercise, things like that, that can positively impact. And so, our goal in the future is to be able to look at these genetics as they potentially change based on people's environmental factors. But that also brings me into a great point too, is that the cool thing about doing genetic testing is, in theory, unless you have some of these epigenetic changes, this is a one-time test. And so there is a cost associated with it, but at one time, you have a lifetime of insight. And so unless something changes in your environment, with one cheek swab, we can tell you a heck of a lot about your body. And then in the future, our goal is to also provide epigenetic testing as that kind of technology catches up with us.
Yeah, I'm so glad you said that, by the way. I meant to ask that earlier, that it's a cheek swab. We're not talking about a blood sample for folks who are nervous around needles. So it's just a simple cheek swab for the testing. And I find what you say so empowering. And I can see people who may not. Some people don't want to know what their genetic makeup is because they believe it is a sentence, that this is how you're made, hence this is how you're always going to be. I find your message and the genetic testing opportunity to be very empowering, because what we know from epigenetics is that we have some autonomy over flipping that switch on or off when it comes to our genes. Granted, there's a lot that we don't control, like a lot of environmental factors that we don't control, inherited trauma that we didn't have any choice over, right? So all of the factors that you mentioned, but we do have choice over things like what we eat, how much we sleep, the stress that we're under, the toxins that we expose ourselves to in our homes, and those all play a part in turning on or off those genetics. I just bought a book the other day. It's a gigantic encyclopedia of a book it's called The Forever Dog by Rodney Habib and another author. Words are hard today. And it was talking about genetics in people and in dogs. And I'm going to bobble the statistics. I feel like they said 6%, but I could be completely off on that it's really a very small percentage of health issues that we have that are actually determined, so to speak, by genetics. It really is the epigenetics that has a much bigger contribution to how these diseases may or may not show up in us. So, okay, so let's geek out on some science a little bit and statistics. And I will, again, link all of this in the show notes. But the first thing that I wanted to talk about is that you mentioned there's a graphic that you have here from Personalized Medicine Coalition. And it talks about prescription drugs. So can you walk us through this graphic a little bit? Well, actually, let me just say here, it's called Percentage of Patients on Ineffective Medications. And we'll kind of walk through a little bit of these, but the statistic that it has overall is that 66% of adults in the US use prescription drugs. 66%. It's $528.4 billion annual cost of medication management, which is mind-blowing. And I don't know, this font is not written for a 52-year-old, so I don't know when this graphic was produced. Do you happen to know what year this was?
It's this like 2017.
Yeah, okay. So a few years old, but I don't think we've improved much in the last, 7 years.
No,
so
all that data moves slowly, right?
Yeah, exactly. So kind of walk us through a little bit the percentage of patients who are on ineffective medications.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what we were alluding to earlier. It's like, sometimes you can't avoid the ineffective medications because let's say cancer and Alzheimer, these two that are the biggest. If you have Alzheimer's or cancer, you don't have many options. And so, I would say pharmacogenomics may not be exactly for these specific medications because you're going to have side effects from these because it's your only option. However, like we discussed, antidepressants, which is one of the most commonly used medications, or asthma drugs, or even diabetes, like looking at these, the fact that these percentages are so high, is upsetting, right? Like it's 2024. Like we should have a better system in place to be able to provide, medications to our consumers in a more effective manner. And so, that it's a huge cost burden. Number one, on our healthcare system, which is a whole nother podcast talk, and the inefficiencies of that. But it's this formulary that we spoke of that insurances are requiring a certain way for people to take medicines and are requiring them to fail before they can find the one that's actually going to work for them. However, with our pharmacogenetic testing, we can say, hey, this is going to help you, and this is what's going to work based on your genes. Is that the end all be all? Absolutely not. However, this is just an additional resource and tool for you to advocate for yourself as a patient, to your provider, or an additional tool for your provider to have more informed decision making to go to the medication that could potentially work for you.
Yeah, and I want to hammer that home because I have a friend who's going through this with their kid, having their kid being put on one antidepressant. Oh, that didn't work. Let's try another one. Oh, we'll give this 4 to 6 weeks to see if this works. In the meantime, the kid and the family are miserable. And this graphic says that 38% of people are on ineffective antidepressants. And just think about, set aside the costs, just the emotional daily life toll that takes, that you're waiting to see, well, is this medication going to work? In the meantime, you feel like crap. Your relationships are suffering. Your work is suffering. I mean, it's just, again, just to have that education piece of the genetic testing so you can short circuit all of that and not have to wait around a year, which is what my friend has been waiting. They've been going through this for a year and their kid isn't getting better. It's so frustrating.
I mean, I feel for your friend and their child, because unfortunately I hear that all the time from individuals who have been struggling and they're looking for another way, right? And I don't feel like in the age of where we are in the technology that we have, that seems unacceptable to me, right? And so, I'll even go into further why I think genetic testing should be the standard of care for that exact reason, right? The therapeutic guessing game that's taking a toll, not just the physical toll, but just all the mental toll on a family, right? And so if we're looking at cost savings, you're like, okay, what's the toll that's taking on that family from a work standpoint?
Yes.
From an emotional standpoint, is there going to be epigenetic changes down the line because the parents are so worried about this child thriving and feeling better that they're hurting their own well-being? I was like, this is a cascade of events that could cost our system much more than if we just treated it properly the first time. And so,
Yeah.
I'll even dive into my own personal experiences. Like, I have a son who, has some difficulties, right? And so I had him recently done with our genetic test, because if we ever have to get on medications, I want to know. I want to decrease that therapeutic guessing game for him. And so that's one aspect. But also uh, we did his emotional health panel to look potentially what propensities that he had. And we're talking ADHD, stress adaptation, anxiety, depression, OCD, and rumination. And right. And so, you know, he came back with a propensity for OCD, which makes a hell of a lot of sense because my wife, love her to death, but you know, uh, uh,
Hey, we
she
all got our
definitely,
stuff.
I know
Yeah.
she definitely exhibits that, but I was able to provide that to his teacher, his school counselor, so they can adjust some of his needs and curriculum based on his genetics. And so, the goal with that, the reason I bring that up is like, hey, we're not just looking at pharmaceuticals as the number one. We want to look at lifestyle changes. We want to look at emotional health changes and the way we can support our children, in a way that potentially doesn't need a pharmaceutical. And then in a last ditch effort, if pharmaceuticals are the way that we want to go, at least providing the information saying, hey, this is the best medication that's going to work for that.
Yeah, that's a beautiful. Thank you for sharing that personal experience about your family and your son, because I think that's such a great example. Because, and again, to drive this point home, this testing is not to diagnose; it's to give you a feedback, a marker, information about what might potentially be on the horizon that you can start now to take steps to keep that gene turned off, essentially, to try and mitigate or minimize that. And so to be able to give that kind of information not only to yourselves but to your son's teachers, to say like, hey, he might be prone to OCD according to this, so here are some things, some steps we want to start taking so that we can try and ward that off or at least minimize it. And I just think that that's so empowering and such a huge piece of information that could save a lot of heartache and money for people down the road.
No,
Um,
thanks for saying that. I
yeah.
completely agree, and I will even adjust my sentiment to the Gen Xers, who are listening to this. I was like, I think this is the ultimate preventative and wellness tool, and I say that because
Yeah.
ideally, we're going to give you the tools and the resources to be an advocate for your own patient care and your own healthcare, right? But then also additional guidance on some of these lifestyle markers so you can optimize your health goals and intentions.
Hmm.
And whether that's longevity, whether that's being better at, sleep, understanding your emotional health, dialing your hormones. I was like, each of these are a piece to help you feel better, for, like my parents, so they can come see me and my children, right? And so, uh, you know, I think you can utilize this to empower yourself through education and additional resources to optimize your health goals, not only from a provider standpoint, but also from a lifestyle standpoint. And so, we can talk about, getting down and playing with your kids and being there for your grandkids and things like that. I was like, I want this to empower people to make life decisions and life changes based on their health goals.
Yeah. So you've recently kind of revamped a little bit of kind of the breadth maybe, or the scope, or how you're doing the genetic testing. And we were talking about this a little bit before we hopped on the recording. And so we're going to try and see if you can screen share. We'll see how this works. So for folks listening on audio, you might want to go jump on the video to check this out. We'll do our best to kind of describe what you're seeing on the screen. And if you're somebody who is vision impaired, we'll kind of do our best to describe what you might be seeing. But I thought it was fascinating to kind of walk through some of these lifestyle panels that you can get. And I do want to, after we kind of go through this, I want to put a pin in to come back and talk. You keep mentioning hormones, and I'm like, we got to talk about menopause. So walk me through, walk me through some of the new lifestyle panel that you have for the genetic testing.
Yeah, so right now, I have our sleep genetics up. And so that's what we talked about, right? Medications, number one, natural medicine guidance, number two, number three is lifestyle. So, I don't know how many people tell me about their sleep scores, right? If they have those fancy beds or an Aura ring or a Fitbit, right? But understanding, let's just say, sleeplessness risk, right? And so this is my genetics specifically, but like mood-induced stress or mood-induced sleeplessness, stress-induced sleeplessness, right? Like I have a neutral propensity for that. So the nice thing is these are genetic markers through studies that we've put together to be able to provide guidance on how best to optimize your sleep, which can change hormones, it can change mood. It's a huge driver, right? And so let's talk about sleep and caffeine. This is what I was talking about
Yeah.
earlier. Is like I'm a slow metabolizer of caffeine, and that gene is CYP1A2. And so by knowing this, I know I should not drink caffeine in the afternoon. And so I drink my one cup in the morning, and I try to be, if that doesn't get it done, I got to figure something else out. Maybe it's a workout or a run or something like that. So
I'm going to pause on that
um,
for a second because I
yeah,
have so many friends, and I will occasionally include myself in this, who drink coffee like all day long. And then they're
yeah,
like, why can't I sleep? I mean, that seems pretty obvious. And if you are somebody who doesn't metabolize caffeine well, this is very valuable information because you definitely want to know, do we know how long on average it takes to metabolize caffeine? Do you know? I
no, I
know
don't.
somebody knows.
I know my pharmacist and our genetic expert could tell you that, but I do not. I'm sure
Yeah.
there's a half-life study in there
There
somewhere.
is. I want to say it's 12 hours, but I could be making that up. But if you're a slow metabolizer, it might take you 15 or 20 hours to metabolize caffeine. So even your 11 o'clock in the morning coffee could be messing with your sleep at 9 o'clock at night. So
Mhm.
I wanted to pause on that because I know a lot of, as I sit here drinking my coffee, but we're well before noon, so I'm good. But I think that's an important piece of feedback.
No, I completely agree. And so, that's something I had to figure out in life, right? Like, all right, if I'm drinking a 1 o'clock coffee, I'm going to be in a world of hurt tonight.
Yeah.
But it's just providing these additional resources, right, to optimize your health goals and understand yourself in a way that you probably previously didn't know, or it at least corroborates a lot of, the things you may have known throughout your life. So, like for
Is
me, my
alcohol on there too?
awakenings.
But, oh, sorry, go
Yes, we
ahead,
do
finish
know
that.
that. No, so here's the sleep, but I'm just kind of going through the sleep stuff, and so I'll go through. Let's go to hormones real quick because I know that was a big one for you. But understanding how your body processes, metabolizes hormones is pretty interesting as well, right? Like as more and more people peri and post menopause, as you kind of alluded to, understanding that, the hormones in your body are dysregulated at that point in your life, and figuring out with your provider what that's going to work for you is some trial and error. And so we'd like to say that this provides an additional resource for your provider and for you to optimize your treatment. And so like here's my specific, like my estrogen level propensities, right? And so understanding these can help me understand how I metabolize it, eliminate it, process it. So, hopefully we can decrease that therapeutic guessing game of optimizing your hormones as well. So
You do
that's,
not look like you're in perimenopause. You look like you're okay. I will say, and yeah, I want to pause on the menopause point, just for personal experience and for all my ladies out there, because it is to say a dysregulation is an understatement. It is like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde most days for me. And I know so much of it is hormone related. And I remember when I went to my doctor, it's been maybe 5 years ago now. This was when I was perimenopausal, and she was like, "Oh yeah, your hormones," and I won't remember, like progesterone, estrogen, I don't know what else they might have looked at, or show that you're in perimenopause. And I'm like, great. This doesn't show those levels. Again, it shows how your body is metabolizing the hormones itself, which can be relevant for if and when you want to get on hormone replacement therapy. And there are different I'm just now starting to look into all this myself, so I don't proclaim to know a lot about hormones for menopause. But there are different like combinations of estrogen and progesterone. There are estradiol patches. This test could help you figure out, which is one of the things my doctor said to me is, "Oh, we'll have to be trial and error with what might work for you." I'm like, I am losing my mind. There is no trial and error. We need to figure something out. And so this test could tell you what could be potentially the better medication or hormone replacement for you to be on if that's the path that you wanted to go. Is that accurate, or did I bobble
Yes.
anything in
So
that?
this is a snapshot in time, right? And so kind of like we talked about, this is what your DNA is basically predisposing you to and how you metabolize it. So, I know I'm not a hormone expert either, but I was like, I think eventually there's blood tests to check to check your levels, but this is another additional resource for you, which in the time of technology, I believe that's something, the more resources we have, the more tools we have, the more data points we have, the more informed we can be to optimize, your therapies. And so I 100% agree with everything that you said, Michelle.
Yeah, and the cool thing about this that just hit me is you have kind of these like overall lifestyle markers panels. Under that is emotional health and things like hormones. And for me, I think it would be really curious to look at not only the hormones, but what I might be predisposed to from an emotional health standpoint, because I know the fluctuation and the decrease of those hormones is impacting my emotional health. So it's like those genetics switches are getting turned on because of my hormones and impacting maybe if I'm predisposed. I can't see exactly, but if that like emotional health marker, anxiety, yeah, definitely hormones are impacting the anxiety. So that would be a great piece of feedback for me to know that.
Oh, for sure. So let's just say, for instance, I have increased cortisol levels based on my genetics, which means it's not great for me to, be in a highly stressful situation for a long period of time, because then it's going to have long-term effects on my sleep, my health, my immunity, things like that. And so it's interesting to know these, because now we can make, hey, when you get in a stressful situation, maybe we talk about being more mindful. Maybe we talk about some meditation. Maybe we talk about some breath work. Like, how do we add that to our repertoire so we can decrease that cortisol so we can optimize our health goals? And then the other piece
Yeah.
is like, let's talk about supplements or diet or exercise or how best to do that. Like, as a child, when I was angry, I would go run or I'd go play football, right? I don't necessarily have the time or energy to be able to do that now, with a family and responsibilities. But I was like, what can we do? What tools can we utilize as grown-ups, if you will, to when we don't have the time or the resources to be able to go out for an hour run, right? And blow off some steam.
Yeah. Brilliant. That's just brilliant. Okay. Anything else you want to show us in the genetic testing panels?
Yeah, so here's the emotional. This is kind of what I was talking about, understanding stress adaptation response, OCD rumination. Also, ADHD propensity is on this one. And then, as far as we're talking, our Gen Xers, there's a lot of us who are looking to biohack. And so, like, a longevity
Mm.
performance panel, potentially understanding mitochondria production, skin aging, oxidative stress, diet, methylation, which we talked a little bit about with the epigenetics of like, okay, what's your telomere length? And so, for instance, here's mine is like, under methylated risk. So I have to make sure that my diet and exercise is in order. My MTHFR, activity is mild, right? And so, understanding this is saying, hey, I potentially need, a B complex or methylfolate more in my diet so I can optimize my energy levels in my detox. So,
So that was
just understanding some of this.
yeah, that's a pretty techie dense few sentences you said there. So I want to break that down to you. First of all, let's start with what are telomeres and why is it helpful to know our telomeres?
So essentially, telomere length is, uh, you know, it's your DNA's. I think as it gets shorter, it
Yeah,
decreases your lifespan, right? So like
right.
increasing your telomere length increases longevity, but
Yeah.
you have a higher propensity for longevity if you're able to optimize your telomere lengths based on healthy lifestyle, which is diet, exercise, stress reduction, decrease of smoking and alcohol, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
And I think that's the big takeaway is this shows you your propensity for essentially how long your telomeres are, which is indicative of your longevity. Again, so you have the information that there are things that you can do to lengthen your telomeres, i.e., lengthen your longevity.
yes, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. So
Yep.
yeah, and
Yep.
Michelle, you were Michelle, you were talking about alcohol genetics, and yes, we do
Yeah.
that. And so this is interesting for people to understand as well. It's like, okay, and I'll tell you, Italian family from New York, like we gather around food and drink. And so alcohol is a big part of our family. And so, I'm a rapid metabolizer of alcohol, which makes a heck of a lot of sense. I don't think I had a hangover until I was in my 30s. And, I was very fortunate of that. But also, at the same token, it never was a deterrent for me to drink alcohol. But understanding this, I think this is a great way to educate yourself on the effects of alcohol, which is, the most popular drug in the world. um, and understand that, there is some negative effects of potentially using it. And so, some of these looks at the inflammation risk on your body, or APOE, which is, basically your cognition gene, right? And so there's different statuses of APOE. And so let's just say for people who have increased, APOE propensities or alleles that, you know, increase their potential cognition and cognitive decline, like that's where smoking, that's where drinking potentially, lead more into those lifestyle habits that we talked about. And so, I know we'll get this in a little bit, Michelle, but a lot of people come to us asking about microdosing and saying, hey, I don't really want to drink alcohol. Will microdosing help with that? And, there's data that shows that it decreases potential, alcoholism, potential addiction, propensities. And I would say anecdotally, when people are microdosing or have taken mushrooms, they just don't have the want or the need to potentially want to drink. And so, I don't want to say we substitute one vice for another, but
Mhm.
using microdosing, which is something more natural, less harsh on your body than alcohol, then I would say, that's a really good bridge or a really good tool to be able to decrease your alcohol if that's something that you're looking to do based on your goals and intentions.
Yeah, really helpful. Thanks for sharing that. That was helpful information to walk through. And one thing came to mind too as I was listening to you talk about the microdosing and alcohol that I thought of earlier is that I know folks, and I know there's a lot of talk now too, because there's some tremendous science coming out around using psilocybin for treating PTSD, especially in soldiers, people who've suffered significant trauma. I've had friends, I'm not recommending this, of course, but I've had friends do their own psilocybin journeys to help with their PTSD. And I think just to keep hammering this home for folks, that's really encouraging. And it would be good to know ahead of time, is your genetic makeup set up to metabolize that in a way that's actually going to be beneficial for you? And so I just that dawned on me, and as we were talking about psilocybin and PTSD a little bit, is there's a lot of promise with that, and like let's see how you might handle that first.
No, for sure. And so, I mean, that's our goal for Grounded is be like, hey, what's the safe consumption practices? So,
Yeah.
I'm a kid of dare, right? And so, like, drugs are bad, and that's how I grew
Yeah.
up. And so, the
Yep.
fact that I, kind of in the psychedelic space and understand psilocybin is vastly different from where my parents probably thought my career was going to go. But with that said, is
Mm-hmm.
like I provide education and advocacy for safe consumption practices, right? And it all starts with this genetic testing. And so this is a nice gateway to be approachable to look into these alternatives, especially if this is something that's new and scary and you don't understand it. So how do you make something less scary? You educate yourself, right? And understanding that psilocybin is not the devil. It's not, the goal is not to, trip balls or something like that, right? Like, if you want the paint to melt off the wall, you can make it happen, but, that's not necessarily everybody's goals, especially in the microdosing, avenue. However, with that said, I think everybody has their specific treat modalities based on their goals, intentions, and needs. And you alluded to doing a major journey. And there's a lot of data behind large journeys with PTSD, major depressive disorder. And there's over 180 clinical studies going on right now that are looking at psilocybin as a breakthrough therapy or a cure-all, if you will. And that's from major depressive disorder to pain and inflammation, to anorexia, to, um, menstrual cramps, right? And so they're looking at this as a treatment modality for a lot of things and a lot of issues. that don't necessarily have great treatment modalities right now. And so I don't think it's the best thing for everybody. And I tell everybody that mushrooms aren't for everybody. However, they make nicer people, and they can sure help a lot of people and guide them in ways that pharmaceuticals may not.
Yeah. So let's talk about microdosing because we've been mentioning it a lot, and so I want to talk a little bit about, first of all, what is microdosing for folks who aren't familiar with it?
No, great question. So essentially, microdosing is taking a 1/10 to 1/20th of of a larger dose, um, which is meant to be subperceptual. And subperceptual meaning that it's going to have subtle effects on your mood, on your cognition, and not, get you to a state that of inebriation, right? And so the goal of microdosing is to be able to try a medicine in a smaller quantity so you can go on with your day-to-day life, but also reap the benefits of these potential healing medicines, right? And so, James Fadiman, who is kind of the godfather of microdosing, he started it with small amounts of LSD in the 60s, and he was using that to see how people would feel the effects, and they felt better, their mood was better, they were more creative. And so that's kind of how his microdosing started. Um, and then that's transitioned into, other substances, right? And so, specifically grounded, we talk about THC, we talk about psilocybin, we lightly talk about MDMA and LSD, and we don't necessarily say we condone those illicit substances. We just want to provide safe consumption, harm reduction practices. However, there are studies that show efficacy in some of these things, and so, let's talk about microdosing on a whole, like microdosing THC, for instance, just for sleep. I know a lot of people are doing that. Let's talk about microdosing your supplements. It could be an entire microdosing lifestyle, and but the broader scope of the thing that we're discussing today is like, let's just talk about microdosing of psilocybin, which is legal here in Colorado.
Hmm. So you have some other graphics that, again, and studies that I'll reference in the show notes when it comes to microdosing. So talk to me a little bit about microdosing and the potential benefits for working with addiction.
No, I think I mean, like I said, there are a ton of data points on people's goals for microdosing. And so I would say for addiction, one of the big things is the data is more skewed to larger doses, and people um, basically not having the want or the need to continue. And so Johns Hopkins has been looking at psychedelics, psilocybin specifically, for almost 2 decades. And in some of their early on studies, we're talking about psilocybin usage to decrease nicotine consumption and alcoholism. And so, as far as microdosing, I have some anecdotal data from members that we have helped, from psychologists, psychiatrists that have utilized microdosing with some of their clients, who maybe couldn't do a larger journey, and it just anecdotally decreases the want or need to want to consume alcohol. And so I would say for myself, coming from a family who enjoys their beverages, when I'm on my microdosing protocols, I don't necessarily reach for that beer after a long day, or that cocktail, right? And so, I can speak to that from a smaller case study. However, these larger doses, with the addiction propensities is something that has been studied by large universities for a long time.
Yeah, and uh, I want to give the caveat again that, of course, we are not recommending this. This is just personal opinions and experience that we're talking about. And I say that because I can hear some people saying, well, you're just substituting one drug for another. And the way I interpret it, and this is again just my own interpretation, is that it's kind of like when you go to a doctor and they prescribe you, I don't know, some medicine to help with your heart disease or your weight or whatever it might be. Sometimes we need a bridge that gives us the capacity to be able to deal with the bigger issue. And so what I hear you saying with the microdosing is it can be that kind of bridge when we're talking about things, for example, like alcohol consumption, that without the microdosing, you may not have the capacity, the maybe calmer state of regulation to be able to say no to the glass of wine at dinner with your family or whatever it is. With the
Yeah,
microdosing, you can. So it's not trying to substitute one for the other, it's sort of giving you that bridge.
for sure. No, and that's what I would say, if you want to kind of get into the potential benefits of microdosing, it's just that. Like I tell individuals, you're not switching one vice for another. Psilocybin's a natural occurring, substance and chemical, and so, much less harsh than alcohol, and on your central nervous system, same thing, much less harsh than than a lot of pharmaceuticals on your body, and so, you know, when I tell people about microdosing, I was like, it's a sub-perceptual dose, so the goal is to be able to do this every day, right? And have this as part of your daily regimen. So that would be one of the biggest things that people do is, and that's the misnomer is say, hey, I microdose every once in a while, but that's not necessarily what it's built for. And so large doses, the macro doses, the hero doses, those are things that are done, um, you know, more sparingly, right? Maybe once a
Mm-hmm.
year, maybe twice a year, depending on your propensity or needs. But the goal of microdosing is to take this subperceptual dose to help with your cognition, to provide that bridge, like we just discussed. And so it's a subtle influence on your mood, your cognition, but not while not impairing you. And so I say this is
Right.
important because this is an approachable way to start in psychedelics or natural medicines, if you will. And so this I like to tell, my microdosing journey became because I wanted you know, I wanted to experience the medicine in a way that was approachable and in small sub-perceptual doses. Sometimes you know it's there, sometimes you don't. And so it's a very easy way for, a kid to kind of dip his toes in the psychedelic water, right? And so,
Mm-hmm.
going to the benefits or why people do it, and I think I sent you a statistic is like, there was a big study that Paul Stamets did, who's kind of,
Mm-hmm.
the god, huge famous mycologist and advocate for mushrooms.
Mm-hmm.
He put together, and this is through his organization Microdose.me, where they did studies, but it's like 82.9% of people did it to be more mindful. And so, what does that mean? I think that's different for everybody, but I think it's perfectly showing that Michelle's in the right career path because a lot of people are wanting some coaching and some guidance. And so using psilocybin as a bridge to be able to get people more mindful, to potentially get them in a meditative state, to increase those telomeres, to be a better person, I think is really important. And so, that's one aspect of this. The other piece is for me specifically was like creativity and mood. Like how do we do this? How do we take something to optimize the way we want to feel and to improve our performance, if you will, right? And so that's
Mm-hmm.
another aspect of it. You have, you know, uh, other benefits potentially are social interactions. People have social anxiety. People have general anxiety. I would say most of the people that come to us have some form of general anxiety, and this kind of cuts the edge off. This is great. Microdosing potentially is great for people who don't want to be on a baseline antidepressant or on an antidepressant, and don't like the way they're feeling because they're nauseous or they feel like a zombie. There's a lot of benefits to microdosing, in my opinion, and that's they work the same way or pretty similarly to an antidepressant. And the last piece I would say, as far as benefits of microdosing, is preparing or for a larger journey or even post a large journey, which is, the preparation stage is like, hey, let's build a relationship with the medicine so we understand the effects a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Then potentially they have their major journey. And then on the back end is called integration, which is basically unpacking what they saw or learned within this journey so they can make lasting change in their lives. And so, microdosing on the back end, kind of helps ease people back into the everyday life. And I think there'll be studies down the line talking about, continuing, with the medicine on the back end may ease people into understanding, into making those palpable changes. So, those are some of the potential benefits of microdosing. I know we wanted to get into it a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, you hit on a lot of the benefits. So if you could kind of sum up what the potential benefits of microdosing could be, what would those be?
So I would say general anxiety, um, creativity, mood, uh, stress, and focus. Like those would be, I would say, let's just say the five adjectives that would be the go-to for me. And so, I'm sure we'll get into it later, but I can talk about my microdosing journey. And one piece that I, kind of forgot is like, hey, you're taking these sub-perceptual doses and in something that's we would call a protocol, or adding it into your everyday life, right? And so there's different protocols based on your goals and intentions. But the goal is taking this sub-perceptual medicine, just like a supplement or a vitamin, every day to kind of build up those good feels in your body, right? And so, one of the common misnomers is like, hey, microdosing or psilocybin is going to change me. The cool thing about this medicine is it doesn't cure the symptom. It gives you the bridge to optimize your goals and intentions. And so,
Yeah.
what I tell people is like, hey, like this morning, I took my microdose. I did about 5 minutes of kind of breath work and meditation. I set my goals to be caring, to be creative, and to make today a great day, right? And so that was just some time to myself. And so the microdosing is a bridge for me to have that focus and that creativity and that kindness that kind of lends itself to what I'm doing today. And so, setting that intention in the morning, intentional microdosing, I think is really important because it is subtle, it is sub-perceptual. And the goal is to not have people microdosing and trading one vice for another, but to give them the bridge to optimize their goals and intentions, and whether that's mindfulness, creativity, um, some of the other adjectives I talked about is like, hey, this is just a tool to continue to better yourself. And so, with that said, is like I would do microdosing in conjunction with a protocol. And so there's a lot of protocols out there based on your goals and intentions, but the goal is these sub-perceptual medicines build up in your system over time. It's kind of like compounding interest, right? You put a little bit of money in the bank every week, and at the end of the year, you have more money than you thought you would have, right? It's the same thing for microdosing. You really need to kind of give it a go for, I would say 30 days. So you have that compounding interest to see how you feel. And so that's one of the big common misnomers is like, hey, I tried a microdose, I didn't feel anything. That's kind of the goal. You want to go all on with your day. But if you do it more in conjunction with a protocol over time, you're going to see those feels and those moods, and your goals and intentions are going to continue to feel better. And so, that's one thing I would definitely want to talk to people about is like, hey, be intentional, do it in conjunction with a protocol. I would recommend a coach of some kind to talk you through this and educate you on journaling or how to optimize your goals and intentions, and then how to be more mindful and present. So, I would say that's kind of where microdosing is now, and showing, with some of the studies I know Michelle and I kind of spoke about is like, hey, you know, the studies show that, or some studies show that microdosing, improves those mood and decreases anxiety and has these desired effects. The tough part now is like, hey, how do we standardize this as a medicine, right? And so, a lot of these studies don't have great data on microdosing, and I'll admit that, because, 0.1% or 100 milligrams versus 300 milligrams, which is essentially a microdose. Um, what's that look like? My 100 versus your 100 may be different because not every strain, not every potency is the same, right? And so understanding and standardizing some of the microdosing practices will, in my opinion, will lead to more efficacious studies. And so that's one
Mm.
thing with Grounded that we're trying to do is provide that education, provide that guidance, and provide that continuity and that consistency. So, when you take two Advil, it's going to get rid of your headache, right? And so, standardizing a practice and, having access to, known products that, are not super strong, but always the same consistency is important for people to have replicable results. And so I would say, as part of the education piece too, is if people are interested in microdosing, it's like know your source, ask questions, educate yourself on this, because not every mushroom is created equal. Some are much stronger than others. Some have high alkaloid contents, which is essentially
Mm.
like the nutrient space, right? And the good feels. And so, understanding this and asking these questions for your source is very important. And then here in Colorado, I would recommend people have a third party source, or sorry, a third party tested source, so they understand the potency, the alkaloid content, and what's actually going into their mushrooms. So, I would say from a safe sourcing aspect, that's really, really important, is understanding and standardizing so you can have replicable results.
And so if someone, and we'll just say in Colorado, has questions about microdosing and is curious about it, is that something that you and your folks at Grounded can help educate somebody around?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, that's our bread and
Okay.
butter. So, we spoke about the genetics, and that's near and dear to our heart, but also like providing safe and approachable guidance on microdosing or psilocybin usage is something we are passionate about as well, because people are curious. I call it micro curious, right? That people want to know about microdosing and how psilocybin may be able to help them, right? And these goals could be large, they could be subtle, right? But like I said, Paul Stamets says that mushrooms just make nicer people, and I don't disagree with that.
When you say that, I have of course, like 80s Mario Brothers vision of the happy little mushroom with like the red cap with the little white
Dude,
dots. That's what I envision. Yeah. You've alluded to this, and so I want to kind of start wrapping up by actually talking to you about your journey with microdosing, and especially in the context of grappling with an issue that I know a lot of folks, especially Gen Xers, are going through, which is navigating aging parents, and particularly when a parent has a terminal health condition. And so, can you talk to us about what was going on with your dad and his condition, and how microdosing has been able to sort of support you along that journey?
no, of course, my microdosing journey has been interesting, right? And so, kind of getting in the space, wanting to understand it more, I was like, I dove into the education to empower myself, right? And that's really how it started. And so, my goal was to see how it probably changed me. Like, fortunate enough, trauma, pretty Jack and Diane childhood, like I told you. And so my microdosing journey was solely for the fact that I wanted to decrease my caffeine consumption, young children. So I was like, that was important, and to be more mindful and more focused and creative. And so, that's how I started. And so I started journaling. And so basically, I was like measuring my creativity, my focus, my mood, my sleep, as kind of the baseline, my mindfulness of what I wanted to achieve, right? And so I kind of put a 1 to 10 scale on that. And let's just say, 1 to 3 was red, 4 to 7 was yellow, and 8+ was green, right? And so my reds and yellows over time, like I said, that compounding interest kept improving. And so let's just say the side effect benefits were increased sleep, because, um, I was taking this mushroom. It was, it was something different. My brain wasn't used to it. And so I can talk a little bit about, you know, the goals, as we talk about, is focus and creativity. And so, there's studies that show lion's mane in conjunction with psilocybin can actually improve memory tests for 55 and up. And that was a TAP test from Paul Stamets study microdose me. That memory scores didn't change in people under 55. However, 55 and up, people who are microdosing increase their memory scores, which I think is really cool. And so, the reason
Sorry,
that,
what's a tap test, by the way?
so essentially, he had an app that did like a finger tap test, and it was like,
Okay.
measured how quickly they could do certain like memory things through an app. And so that's
Okay.
how they measured it. But the reason that works is because psilocybin is able to regenerate neurons and synapses in your brain. And so I tell people, it's like, hey, your brain always does this, right? We're creatures
Mm-hmm.
of habit. But with psilocybin, maybe you can do this, which is the
Mm-hmm.
creativity and the neuroregeneration. And so, it kind of changes the way people think in subtle ways. And so that's important. And I think that's a study that, has shown a lot of efficacy for our goals here, right? And that's that creativity and focus. And so, you know, my scores continue to improve over my 2 months of microdosing, right? And then, it is recommended to take some breaks, because that gives your receptors some time to breathe, and kind of reset. And so, then every 2 months or so, I change my intention based on where I'm at in my life. And so,
Mm.
you alluded to it, Michelle, is like, my my microdosing journey was about creativity, focus, less caffeine, being a more mindful parent. And then, my dad got diagnosed last year with a glioblastoma, so a brain tumor, which are always fatal. Um, you can't cure them, and so, that changed my mindset. And so, and my parents were 65 years old, so, normal, healthy. He was having some headaches, not thinking much of it, and then, had a scan done, and, he calls me from the hospital, and he told me what happened. And so, that drastically changed the paradigm and you know, my microdosing regimen and my intentions, because I was like, okay, I want to be more, I want to be there for my parents. I want to be there for my brother. I need to be really present when I'm here. So, my transition from creativity, focus, energy was more towards like, hey, dealing with anxiety and potential grief and longing. And so, that is transition. And so I kind of talked about the medicine not doing things for you, but providing the bridge. And that's what I've noticed in my own microdosing journey, is that it's met me where I am, and it's helped me subtly in the ways that I needed to be helped. Right. And so, it didn't put a band-aid on my symptoms. It helped me kind of work through some of the things that I needed to work through. And so, having a more calm, decreased anxiety, kind of day-to-day outlook was the strength that I needed to have to be able to talk to my mom, to talk to my brother, and help support them in the way they needed to be supported. And so, that's, you know, over the last, let's just say 6 months, my dad has recently passed, but microdosing has helped me with that general anxiety and that feeling of longing. I will say, since he's passed, it has not helped with grief, and I'll be very honest about that, but it's a very different emotion than just general anxiety. Um, and so, it's interesting how a small capsule and a subperceptual dose has had that profound impact on myself. And like I said, has helped me through, the last year. And I was to the point where where I wasn't necessarily microdosing all the time. And that's someone who, has a company that supports people who microdose, right? And, that's my goal with people, is to say, hey, this is a bridge to get you where you are. And then, when we're done, like, I don't necessarily need to see you all the time. I want you to be intuitive about it. So, which means take a microdose when you want it or when you need it. Right. And so, with the recent grief, I was like, I'm back on my protocols, and it's less intuitive. It's more protocol driven. But, it's vastly kind of morphed as I've needed it to.
One thing I want to emphasize, and thank you for sharing that journey and story, and my heart goes out to you and your family with your dad passing away just in September. So, is that what I do not hear is that microdosing is going to take away your anxiety or your grief or your longing or your depression or whatever it might be. That it's not only creating that bridge, but it's creating the capacity and the space. I think space is a good word for it, for you to be able to navigate through, heal around, be present with the anxiety, the depression, the longing, the grief. And so I really want, especially Gen Xers, to hear that, because I'm just going to focus on Gen Xers. I know other generations are like this too. Gen Xers were not raised or conditioned to want to play with the bad, heavy, quote, bad, heavy emotions. We were taught to ignore them, triage them over, if at all, and keep on barreling through life. And that catches up with us and does such a great disservice to us and the whole beautiful lives that we are capable of living if we're not willing to be in relationship with these more challenging emotions. And that can be very hard for us to do when we're not used to doing it. That in and of itself can be re-traumatizing, to all of a sudden be faced with heavy grief, anxiety, longing, depression, all of those things, and not know how to sit with it And so to be able to have something like microdosing that gives us more space to be able to sit with it. And that's what I hear. So that you can journal, so that you can meditate, so that you can do therapy or whatever it might be. And so I love that message in your journey, that it's given you the capability and the space to be able to do that.
No, thanks for saying that. Yeah, I'm a big proponent of it. I mean, it's vastly changed my outlook on things, and I'm fortunate enough to not be on medication, so I was like, I don't have much to compare it to. But currently, I was like, we're helping people taper off medications, that make
Hmm.
them not have the desired effects that they want. Whether that's
Yeah.
long-term antidepressant usage, whether that's sleep aids. Like I said, we try to meet people where they are, and I think microdosing microdosing lends its hands to that as well. And so, if your goals are getting on or off the proper medication, maybe trying to be more mindful, trying to be more, astute about, your health goals, and reducing alcohol consumption and being more mindful, and all of the things that was kind of previous. I was like, I would, kind of tell people, I was like, maybe give microdosing a try.
So I know you don't have anything to compare it to in terms of being on prescription medication, and it's hard to think in hypothetical terms. Knowing yourself as you know yourself, though, what do you imagine might have been the difference for you if you hadn't been microdosing in getting through that time period? And you're still going through it, but particularly through the time period when your dad was sick. What do you think the difference was between microdosing and if you hadn't been microdosing?
I think it took the edge off, right? And like I said, it's not a cure-all. It's not
Hmm.
a numbing agent like some of these antidepressants. It's a support mechanism, right? Like it's a vitamin, it's a supplement, is the way we look at it. And I think it took that 20% edge off. And I could tell you, the way I felt before, during, and after having had a microdosing, when I could feel some anxiety coming on, was palpable, right? And it just seemed to kind of blow off in the breeze, and so, one thing I would say is, being mindful in that and having that as a practice has helped, making that a more daily recurrence in my life. But I think it's just that 20% better person, 20% less anxious, 20% more focused, 20% more kind. I think that's, the subtle benefits of microdosing, and at least I can say anecdotally for me, that was the change.
Were those changes in you that other people in your family recognized and mentioned to you?
I mean, I think also subtle, right? And so, like,
Hmm.
I've talked to prescribers, neurologists, all of these people, and they always say, like, if someone's on antidepressant, they can't usually tell if they feel better, but they can on a stimulant. However, it's the significant other, the person that sees them on a regular basis, who says, like, oh yeah, they felt better. Like, they were, less angry, more kind, all of those things. And I would say I was getting some of those kind of, hey, how are you handling this? Right? You seem very calm, which is a lot of my nature too. And maybe it's the duck on the pond kind of analogy, that my feet are
Hmm.
going 100 miles a minute, but I was able to. I think it supported me in the way that I could support others, in the way they needed to be supported, and provide me the comfort. And so, I would say my wife would also say the same thing, like, hey, you're just a little bit more chill, from it. And, it's subtle, but it was just enough for people to, like, kind of have these comments here and there.
Where are you in your grief process now?
Oh, I'm very early. Um, you know, uh, the greatest thing is, like, my dad and I had a fantastic relationship, and for better or worse, watching his quick decline, I think helped, instead of something, let's just say a car accident or something like that, that was so quick and snap, uh, that I was able to kind of see this. So, the way he lives in Texas, so, like, our conversations were FaceTime with my children, with me, phone calls, weekly. And so, just talking about life, and he was always my confidant, right? Like, so we talked about from big stuff to small stuff, right? And he was also my sports updates. So, it's kind of fun that, I'd call him and be like, hey, how are the Yankees? How are the Giants doing? Kind of tell me, the lay of the land. And then he'd ask about the kids. We'd talk about work stuff, and we had a great relationship like that. So, you know, I would say 6, 8 months ago, he couldn't really talk on the phone anymore. So that was a big piece of our relationship that had already kind of declined. We'd still FaceTime with my mom and things like that. And so for me, I got to see, kind of the decline, and I started to not have pieces of him here and there, um, that I think helped with my grief process, right? And so every time one of those pieces I would lose of him, I would grieve in that moment, right? And so then when we finally lost him, I could see his peace, the peacefulness of when after he passed, that he was in some pain. The way brain tumors work, essentially, you stop eating, you stop, being able to talk, and they just kind of lay there, and they usually aspirate. So he had gotten to the point where we could see that kind of come, and he stopped eating, stopped drinking. Um, some of his cognition was going extremely fast, and so I was able to see these steps, which was good for me. And then as far as the grief part now, we had his funeral a few weeks ago that I wasn't sure if it was going to provide closure, that I didn't necessarily need it, but like it was more of just like beautiful to see someone who gave their life to education and coaching, the profound impact he had on so many people, which will forever like be ingrained in my heart and my mind. And so, my grief process is still ongoing, and I'm still
Mm-hmm.
dealing with it. I have my days for sure, especially like when my kids want to, when my kids want to FaceTime my parents, and it's only my mom now. And so, I talk to my mom and my brother almost every day. They're coming to visit soon, so it's like we're all handling it in our own ways, but at least for me, like kind of his journey has been slow and fast at the same time. So it gave me some time to spread out my grief, in a way that was helpful for me.
Yeah. I There is so much that is wrapped up into grief, and I did a entire series on the podcast about just losing parents and the grief around that. And so I really honor you and where you are, because it is still pretty raw, it's still pretty fresh, and it is a constant process. It's not something that has an endpoint. It can creep in a lot of different ways down the road. And so I really appreciate the fact that you are someone, and you are a guy who is very willing to be in that process, not rush it, recognize that, there may not be an endpoint to this at all. This is just where I am right now. And I hope that people can take some encouragement and inspiration for that. And I'm wondering, outside of microdosing, if there are some words of wisdom or inspiration that you can give to folks who might be navigating aging parents or a terminal illness with parents or someone that they love. What would you like to say to those people?
Oh, I think that's a great thing. I think, life is fleeting, right? Enjoy every moment. I mean, I was fortunate enough to have a great relationship with my dad. I would say, if that's not where you're at, um, you know, mend fences. It's not worth the time and energy to be angry. I would say, having a great relationship with him made the grief process that much easier because I didn't have anything unresolved. We were very open about our conversations, and I will say one of my only regrets is his second surgery, his cognition declined rapidly, and I didn't say some of the things I would have liked to and how important he was to me. Before that, I did afterwards. I don't know if they necessarily resonated like I would like them to, but don't leave things unsaid. And in this world, I mean, my dad was 65, worked until 2 or 3 years ago, and so you spend your entire life working to save so you can live in retirement, thinking that you're going to live till you're 85, and that may not be in the cards for a lot of people. So just understanding that we're here for a finite amount of time to maximize it with your friends, family, whoever's important to you, and having an open dialogue about how important those people are to you, I think is really for me been, a great aspect of, not having to grieve the things I wish I would have or did or didn't do. Right. And then I would say the second avenue of that too is, and Michelle and I have talked this off camera, but having an open and dialogue with children. So I have young children about their grandfather dying, and his name was Poppy, right, is what they called him. And so kind of talking to them about how we grieve as a family and letting them see me emotional, letting them see me potentially cry, um, and saying, hey, it's okay because this is someone who's important, and showing them that what's important to us, and this is how we grieve as a family, and this is only going to bring us closer. And having that open dialogue, I think, has been really beneficial. And I know, I think it's called the heartstrings or something like that. Like my wife was great. She bought a book, and it basically talks about, hey, you have a string, an invisible string attached to, the heart of your loved ones that you can always pull on to say hi, whether they're here or whether in heaven or wherever, you think people go. And that has been a very touching book for my children to understand what this kind of means. And so I would say, educating them, having that open dialogue, um, has been important to me because they see the pain that I've had to go through, and they are very empathetic even at a young age for that.
That pulled at my heartstrings. I had not heard of that, and that is beautiful. And I deeply appreciate you sharing that powerful insight, because I hope that Gen Xers can take a cue from you, because your parents were boomers, 65, so a little bit older than the Gen X generation. Gen Xers like myself who had boomer parents learned to just have a stiff upper lip. Like, and your parents sound like they were a little bit different than, and again, we're kind of I'm generalizing here among the generations, but like most boomer parents were about just stiff upper lip, you can cry for a little bit and then we got to move on. And that's what we internalized. That's what we learned. And so we, as Gen Xers, don't model vulnerability or our emotions well, or even know how to do it understandably. And so for Gen Xers who are parents, understanding how critical it is to let your children see you be vulnerable, to let your children see you wrestle with and confront and face these more challenging emotions, and to do this healing together. And I wish my parents could have done that, and I understand why they didn't, because they weren't taught how to do it either, right? And so I'm really grateful to people like you out there who are modeling that for parents and for the kids. And I hope that other Gen Xers can pick up on that cue from you.
Yeah, like you're saying, we're just trying to figure this out as well.
Yep,
But just trying
exactly.
to provide tools for people in similar situations, because I think we're stronger together than we are apart. And
Yeah,
I'm sorry
yeah.
for anybody who's listening to this is going through that similarly. But I hope I've been able to provide some words of wisdom.
You absolutely have. So before we wrap up, I just want to touch base and see, was there anything that we didn't touch on that you wanted to talk about?
I think we talked about a lot, Michelle. I mean, I
We
would
covered
say
a
the
lot of
biggest
ground.
thing, I know, I would say the biggest thing is like, hey, if you want to know more about medications, natural medicines, lifestyle, and kind of, biohack yourself, please reach out. I
Yep.
think I want to be a resource and a tool for you to optimize your goals. And whether that's through genetic testing, whether that's through monthly coaching, whether that's through a meeting with our pharmacist or genetic expert, I want to offer our services to people because I think they are important in making palpable change, and the future's now. We're not getting younger, like we've been talking about, right? So, like, how do we make that lasting change in our lifetime so we can, look at our longevity or feel better on a day-to-day basis. And so, my goal as a company and as kind of an educator and advocate for Ground is meet people where they are, empower them through education so they can take care of their own health. And you know, I'm really passionate about that and really thankful to have been able to share that with you guys today.
Yeah. Yeah, that's one of the last things I wanted to ask you before we moved into the lightning round is tell folks where we can find you. And of course, I'll link all of this in the show notes.
Of course. So our website's grounded.healthcare, and you can find us online. We have LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram pages as well that Michelle can link you to.
Yep. And you have an email too that I'll link in the show notes, Matt at grounded.healthcare, if folks want to get in touch with you too. All right, let's do a quick millennial revised lightning round if you're up for it.
Let's do it.
Okay. What is your fondest Gen X child, or see, I'm millennial, fondest millennial childhood memory? If you have a Gen X memory too, that's great.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to dive deep on those. I would say driving to the beach in a Camry station wagon with the windows open and the smell of the beach and peanut butter and jelly sandwiches.
Is your biggest piece of advice for just other folks going through transitions in their lives?
Ooh, I think would be give yourself grace. You know, like they don't teach us early on in life how life is going to throw so many things at you, and you have to be adaptable, right? And so, you know, the nice thing about the world that we live in now is there's a lot of resources, the internet being one of them, to be able to find coping mechanisms or educate yourself on how to get through things. And so I would just say, you know, education is empowerment. And so giving yourself grace and then trying to equip yourself with the education to be able to make palpable change.
What is your favorite millennial era word or phrase?
The first one that came to me was gnarly, but I think I've never used that in my entire life.
Hey, it came to mind for a reason. Maybe you should start using it more.
Yes, yes.
That's funny. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not as well versed in millennial language. I feel like Gen X has so many like buzzwords and phrases. As far as Gen Z, I don't know what they're talking about half the time. I feel like they've created just all new words. So I don't know what a Gen Z era phrase is going to be. But yeah, no, gnarly. I think you should go with gnarly. What is a millennial era theme song for your life?
Ooh, probably anything by the Wallflowers in the 90s or Hootie and the Blowfish.
What happened to the Wallflowers anyway? Jacob Dylan. I don't know where he is nowadays.
Yeah, I don't know. I did just see, I was like, you can see that's a Hootie and the Blowfish concert. That's one of my wife's favorite bands. So
Is that what that
we
is? That's so
yeah,
cool.
we recently saw them. So yeah,
Oh, that's
last week.
awesome. Darius Rucker. Yeah.
Mhm.
And what do you most appreciate about being raised in the millennial generation?
I didn't get a cell phone until I was 16. So having the opportunity to play outside because I didn't have anything else, have the opportunity to be bored, have the opportunity to disconnect and have to remember phone numbers because there's a rotary dial,
Mm-hmm.
I think is pretty special, right? I will say I think even technology now is starting to get a little advanced for me, so I understand you know, the plight that Gen Xers and boomers are dealing with now because I'm like, oh, embracing AI, whew, that's a little scary for me. But yeah, I was like, I would say it was very basic comparatively to now, and you know, I didn't have to deal with social media or any of that stuff when I was a child or my parents. So it's like, you know, that'll be an interesting dynamic for my children.
Mm-hmm. Yep, that overlaps with the Gen X experience. So all us Gen Xers can remember pre-cell phone days for sure. Matt, thank you so much for spending this time with me today. I know that folks are going to get a lot of valuable wisdom and knowledge, and I hope that folks reach out to Grounded. By the way, one follow-up question. Can folks out of Colorado reach out to Grounded Health?
Oh, 100%.
Okay,
100%. So, you know, our
just want to make
genetic
that clear.
testing is for everybody.
Yep. Okay, great. So folks know that. Don't feel like you have to live in Colorado to take advantage of that. Thank you so much, Matt. Take care.
No, thank you, Michelle.
I hope you enjoyed geeking out on the science with Matt as much as I did. I felt so empowered after this conversation with Matt and with my other conversations that I've had with him. And I hope that it's planted some seeds for you to start to get curious about how you can take more autonomy and control back over your mental and physical health as you move through all of these transitions. If you have any questions, please remember to reach out to Matt and look up Grounded Healthcare. I'll link all of the information in the show notes. And I'd love to hear your reactions. I read all of the emails and comments that I get on the podcast, so make sure to share those wherever you are listening. Send me an email at podcast@lifefromthesummit.com. And if you're getting value and information out of this podcast, it means so much to me when you like, share, and review the podcast. It helps bump it up in the algorithms so that it gets out to more Gen Xers. Thanks so much for coming on this journey today. I can't wait to see you next time. And in the meantime, stay gold, Gen Xers.